All right, so welcome to Who's Gonna Fill Their Shoes. I'm Josh,
Hey, it's Wes.
and this week we're going to be talking about Freddy Fender's Before the Next Teardrop Falls.
Yes, indeed. The debut album by Mr. Freddy Fender.
Technically, the debut album, I think. I don't know if you looked into any of that at all. Or
Well, yeah, he has an interesting history, and it's kind of fascinating how long it took him to sort of have a debut, so to speak. I mean, some of these songs were recorded, at least in one case, one of them, as late as like the late 1950s, but 1959, I think. But I know we'll get into that. Yeah, I mean, you ever looked up? I did not know that much about Freddie's background in life, and the more I read about it, the more kind of fascinated I was because he certainly did not follow a very traditional path to fame.
yeah, I didn't really know much either. And he was born Baltimore Garza Huerta, June 4th, 1937, in San Benito, Texas. And he kind of it seems like he got into music, singing on the radio station around Texas, then dropped out of high school and joined the Marine Corps, where it seems like he got kicked out for drinking and alcoholism, maybe. Yeah, he was court-martialed. And then after he dropped out of that, he started playing in clubs around Texas, singing in Spanish and English, it seems like. And some of that music, I looked it up, it seems pretty rockabilly. I don't know if you listen to any of it.
Yeah, which makes sense for when it came out, and I'm just gonna. I have the record, the actual record here, in my hands, and on the back of it, there's a pretty long. A lot of times I don't really pay much attention to some of these things, but in this case, he actually wrote about sort of his early life and how he got to this, and he says similar to what you just talked about. When I was 16, I dropped out of high school and joined the Marines for 3 years. I got to see California, Japan, and Okinawa, but mainly I got my point of view from the time I spent in the brig. It seemed that I just couldn't adjust myself to such a disciplined way of life. I always liked to play the guitar in the barracks and to drink, so much so that sometimes I forgot where or who I was. And he says in the late 50s, he was back in San Benito playing beer joints, Chicano dances, and starting my singing career. And he began recording some all Spanish Chicano records. And he said by 1958, they were doing very great in Texas and Mexico. And then he describes what he was making as Tex Mex rockabilly music. Um, and that kind of brings us to, we'll talk about that song, but, the 1959 song was Wasted Days and Wasted Nights. And we'll hit more on that when we get to that song. But yeah, I guess he did some time in jail for, he says, I was busted for quote unquote grass in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Ended up doing about 3 years in jail.
Yeah, I read that. He did 3 years in the Louisiana State Pen, and he was released by the governor then, Jimmy Davis, apparently. I guess he kind of got off with agreeing that he wouldn't go around beer joints, it seemed like.
Yeah, it says this is kind of fascinating too. He says, I even recorded an album of Chicano songs on a portable tape recorder at the prison. Um,
Yeah, I actually looked, I don't know if it's the same ones, but I looked up, he kind of, I guess, recorded some in secret under the name Scotty Wayne in the 60s, and I looked them up. They're super rockabilly, and they're actually really cool. I was kind of surprised I was listening to those.
yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, ultimately, it sounds like he more or less had given up on sort of a musical career in a lot of ways. He says, so I went to work as a mechanic and played music on weekends, getting $1.60 an hour and $28 a night, picking so that I didn't starve to death. And then he says by 74, I was living in Corpus Christi, Texas, and a friend had told him about Huey Mew. Have you been saying it Mew? Is that how you say that last name? Or Mew?
It might be Mo. Yeah, because he's Cajun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't. He goes on to say that they had told him about him, a recording producer, from Houston who had produced some big hits on B.J. Thomas, Joe Barry, and my good friend Doug Sam. So we'll certainly talk more about that. But yeah, I mean, you turned me on. Am I saying Doug's name right too?
Yeah, Doug Somm. It's a
Doug
Mao.
Sam.
Huey P. Mao. That's how you'd say it.
Mao. Okay.
With I don't have a Cajun accent, just a Southern one. So
Well,
those
he's
names are hard.
I mean, Josh was researching this stuff and said, "Uh-oh," because you go to his picture and right away it's a guy who's been busted and he went to jail for some real nasty stuff. So we're not really going to give him any space or time other than to say he is sort of the reason why Freddie's first album sort of first came together. Although it was recorded, they remind me they recorded one of the songs. It kind of became a hit, and then they bought out the rights from Huey, right?
I didn't read that too much.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that's what I understood because if you look at the debut, it came out on ABC Records, and what I read is that once one of those songs started getting a lot of radio play, they actually bought the record out from the smaller label that Huey was running, which I actually think it was something like I could go look it up, but I want to say it was like Crazy Cajun Records or something like that.
Okay. I don't want to get too far ahead too, or I just back up for a second. I think something we didn't talk about is that he changed his name to Freddie Fender back in '58, and he got
Yes.
that. I was kind of wondering because Fender guitars, and that's actually where he got it from. He just thought that sounded interesting, and then said Freddie sounded good with it, and so that's where he changed his name back in '58.
Yeah, he doesn't talk about the origin of it on the back of this, but the very first paragraph he does say, I just picked up my stage name, Freddy Fender, in the late 50s as a name that would help my music sell better with quote unquote gringos. Now I like the name, he says. I think he
Yeah.
did go by that more or less the rest of his life, although I did read one of his last records was the music of, um, and it was under his actual name, what he was born under.
Baltimore Huerta.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and so right around that time he changed his name, like you said. In '59, he recorded "Wasted Days and Wasted Nights," and he wrote that one. It's his version's actually the original. It's pretty true to the re-recording. It's not super different.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't think it sounds like necessarily a song from 1959, to be totally honest.
All right, so like we said, this was his debut album under Freddie Fender, and it was released in '74. And we said it was produced by Huey P. Mao on the recommendation of Doug Somm. Mao was responsible for the Sir Douglas Quintet, which was kind of a funny group there in the late '60s, which was a bunch of Texans that were trying to pretend they were British and had some great songs, but it's pretty funny if you listen to some interviews and stuff, hearing that they were trying to talk in British accents and stuff is completely an absurd concept to think about now.
It's like the bizarro version of the Rolling Stones singing country music.
Yeah, in a way it is. But this album peaked at number 20 on the Billboard 200 actually.
Yeah, it had a lot of crossover pop success too, from what I understand.
All right, and so yeah, like Wes said, I'm not going to talk about the producer at all on this. He produced some pretty great albums, but deserves no time in the history or legacy of country, if I'm being honest here. So we just wanted to mention him for posterity and historical reasons, but I'm not going to even go into anything else he worked on besides that and how the connection formed. Unlike some of these other producers who I don't mind talking about as much, but we have Randy Corner on guitar on this album, Donnie King on bass, Chester Vaughn on drums, and Fred Heine on steel guitar, is what I found. Did your track listing have anything else?
Let me double check. Any of those Chester Vaughn kind of sounds familiar, but a lot of these
I
names are not the same names we've been seeing for the most
No, I
part.
wasn't familiar with any of these guys actually.
Yeah, maybe that's just my brain making that up. I'm looking at the actual. There's like no. Oh wait, hold on. Yeah, okay. I can tell you what's listed here. There's actually more on the back than what we have. So for bass, they've got Donnie King. So you got that. Drums, Chester Vaughn. Yeah, so that's right too. Lead guitar, Randy Corner. So
Yep.
you've got that too. Piano has Bruce Ewan and James Lowry.
Okay.
So that's kind of cool because I don't think we had that one. And then they actually list rhythm guitar out as Mickey Moody, and Mickey Moody playing the steel guitar as well as Fred Heine.
Okay.
And they've got Bruce Ewan playing the harpsichord.
That's right. I did see that somewhere. I think I put it in my notes, but now I'm losing them because we got harpsichord again.
Yeah, it shows up once again. Oh, and the background vocals, it says were the Sugar Sweets, or just Sugar Sweets, sorry. And it says introducing Tracy Friel or Friel. So yeah, that's actually we that's probably the most credits we've seen listed on like an actual album like that so far.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of albums usually have that on there, but we've kind of ran into some of these albums not having any credits at all. So trying to pull out who was even on them. I mean, obviously, even knowing who's on what song was pretty impossible, but at least we have an accurate representation on this one.
Yeah, yeah, everybody's pretty well credited there. Yeah, I don't know why that's been such an issue on some of the ones we've listened to. Maybe because a couple of them were from like similar time, and we talked about the Plantation Records. They didn't seem to list a lot of theirs. And again, we're away from that on this. This is totally different, but so it's much more common for those to be listed out. I think in that long form way.
Yeah, and I unfortunately couldn't find my copy of this to look at it, and it's hard to zoom in on the internet. I only found my singles, and they don't have track listing. So I'm glad you had that so you could look at it.
Yeah, picked that album up a little while ago, and it's one that I quite enjoy.
But since you have that there in person, that album cover we could talk about, it's pretty awesome and sets the mood for this theme of the album, I would say.
Yes, it is quite a close up vision of Freddy's face, sort of looking off almost into the sunlight, it seems. But he does not look happy.
He has an actual tear on his cheek, doesn't he?
It's hard for me to see if that's the case on this. I don't see that on the cover that I'm looking at.
Maybe not, but it definitely seems like it's about to be there. If not, he's out in the
Yeah,
distance. Yeah, it's kind of a great photo there.
it is, and he's wearing this sort of red, almost velvety looking blazer. You can only see really the top of it, and the collar is a sort of floral, like white shirt. And On the back, as a matter of fact, of the record is a sort of it's a shot of him. Back behind him is what looks like almost like a collapsed roof or something. He's wearing that all red suit. And he's smiling on the back, sort of a little grin, and he's wearing cowboy boots, and he's got one foot propped up on a rock. So pretty badass stuff.
So that takes us to track one, which is "Roses Are Red, My Love," and this was written by Paul Evans and Al Byron. And this one was originally recorded by Bobby Vinton back in 1962, and it was his first hit. I thought this was an interesting opener for the album. You know, it's kind of slow and sentimental. Freddie's voice is great here, but I think this song kind of sounds like it was recorded in 1962. It feels a little dated and feels more like it could be the ending song rather than the opener.
Yeah. We keep talking about sequencing on all these, but and we'll never stop probably because it's important to me and it was important for a lot of records. But it's interesting that you would think that something that maybe would have been the single or would have been a hit would kind of kick off a record, but that's not been the case on a lot of these that we've listened to, and that's not really the case here either. It does feel a bit dated. I mean, it feels like a song that would have made sense for Bobby Vinton, and it's when we say dated, I don't think we're saying something is bad either. I just when you listen to what else was coming out in 1974, this does not sound anything like that really. And we don't have like the strings like we had on the Charlie Pride record that we just did. That's not really present here, but it just sort of has like a I don't know, almost like a this could be like a crooner track in some ways. And yeah, when you think about how when Freddie first started getting involved in music, maybe that's part of what has to do with here. But um, it's a sweet song. I'm not sure that it's my favorite song at all, but it's there's nothing wrong with it.
No, I think for myself when I started this album, because I wasn't as familiar, I knew some of the hits and stuff, but when that song started, I was a little skeptical of where this was going. But I don't hate it; it's fine. And yeah, there is no strings. Finally, probably I don't know. It's hard to tell. I'm kind of surprised the way that some of these songs are. They're more pop centered, so I'm a little surprised there's none, but may have not been in the budget.
Yeah, probably that more than anything. And some of it is just, we didn't talk about this in the intro, but when I was reading more about Freddie Fender, I knew that he had the Tejano background, but I did not know that he had spent a lot of time in Louisiana, and almost had a Cajun influence. We'll talk more about this, but I guess some of his sounds are described as swamp pop. So maybe it's just that he wasn't bringing in this sort of influences of some of the other people that we've listened to. I just we've really gone from like true Nashville session stuff to like this is a whole different blend of country music when we're diving into like Cajun influence and the influence of Texas. It's just completely different, right?
For sure. And I think that may have been part of the connection too with Huey because he had produced some of that swamp pop music. And yeah, I mean, he had the Mexican roots, the country roots, and that Cajun as well. It makes for a more unique blend and kind of why his style was really unique. Like you said, that Tex Mex Tejana
Yeah.
music that he really was able to use as like crossover success.
Yeah, it's what makes it. You're right. It is really what makes him kind of stand out, and especially in 1974 for this to be his debut. Like, I can't. I'm excited to talk about some of the songs on here because I just don't think many other people were recording things that sounded exactly like this. And like the tracing the roots of like country music that came out of Texas is fascinating in its own right, because it's very different from really what you get in some of the Nashville studios, especially around this time, in country music, like the mid
For sure.
'70s.
Yeah, this is no Nashville album.
No.
All right, so track two is I'm Not a Fool Anymore, and this was written by Robert Thibodeau. And I love this. I wish this opened the album up. I think, well, I don't think, I'm pretty sure that's the harpsichord again. And all right, it works here. I will admit, I actually think it's really cool. I like the mood of the song a lot on this one. It's not upbeat, but the instrumentation is sort of joyous sounding, I would say, despite how sad the lyrics are.
Yeah, yeah. I think the harpsichord works best on this song out of any of the ones that we've heard it on so far, and um, you feel that influence of what we were just talking about here, his time in Louisiana, and like, there's not an accordion on this. It will make an appearance, but I almost the way the harpsichord's being played on this, it's not quite there. But I think of like Zydeco and the sort of influences of Louisiana sound, and like it makes sense why it would feel more natural in this song, in the style that Freddie's singing. And yeah, it is it's this is just a cool song in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think it's the swamp pop sound, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it sounds kind of in between like an accordion organ, but it's a uniquely its own sound, and so it works there.
Yeah, yeah, and the background singers, they show up a few times pretty prominently on this record, and honestly, I like it every time they do. Again, I guess that's Sugar Sweets, which I'm not very familiar with, but They add sort of, it's not that like haunting sound. They just work really well with Freddie's voice. It's just pleasant.
Yeah, and I probably should have done more research into that. I couldn't find if that was a singular person or a group, but I also made that note that the chorus was really brilliant with those background singers on this one. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, we can maybe dive. We'll see if we can find more stuff and we can post it on the Substack page for this. Because there's a lot of videos actually that go into sort of some of the cast of characters involved around Freddy, and there's some great live stuff. So we'll see what we can dig up.
Yeah, thankfully there's a pretty decent amount of stuff on Freddy, at least visually. I didn't find a ton of written stuff as much, but like we said, we're just like to discuss the albums and can only find so much research stuff. Otherwise, we'd be recording these forever.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, so that brings us to track 3, which is Please Don't Tell Me How the Story Ends. And this was written by the great Chris Christopherson.
Yeah. How do you feel about this album or this track? I mean, on the album.
Freddie's version's maybe not my favorite version of the song. You know, Ronnie Millsap took the song to number 1 on the Hot Country Singles Chart actually in the same year, 1974. His version's actually a little similar to Freddie's, but I actually love Bobby Bare and Chris's versions of this track the most. But lyrically, you know, this song's a masterpiece, and there's so many cover versions of it. It's maybe too sad of a song. I relate to it too much, and it's hard to listen to. But Freddie's version's not maybe as soul crushing. That's just kind of a pretty standard recording of it. Pretty true.
Yeah, I think that's right. I wasn't actually as familiar with some of the other versions, so I'll have to go dig those up. That's awesome that it's a Christopherson song and that it appears on this too. It makes me happy. But I like the intro of the guitar playing. I think it sounds really good. I mean, I assume that's then Randy Corner since he's listed as lead, but you know, it's a very 70s sounding guitar. Like it was giving me sort of like Badfinger vibes. Um, in a good way. It doesn't sound all that country. This one's like a maybe a little bit more of a pop version of this, although there is some good pedal steel on it when it pops up, so that's kind of nice too. But you know, just talking about guitar playing too, I you know, Freddie was a pretty good guitar player from what I see. If you look at videos, it seems like he played a lot, but I don't know that he was playing on any of these tracks. Maybe just singing. I mean, he's not credited with playing guitar. Um, I think that's kind of fascinating, given that my take on him is that he's a good singer, but also that he could play the guitar decently well too.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if some of these studio sessions they just had people that were, you know, this proficient guys and just let the singer focus on singing, and then live it was a little more convenient to play. But I also couldn't find anything about that, so who knows?
Yeah, yeah, it's just something I've been thinking about too, just in terms of like a lot of the people that we've listened to, some didn't really play the guitar very much or at all, and others did. And yeah, it's I think it'll be interesting as we get into some of the artists that we cover. There are some people that pretty famously like play quite well, but there doesn't seem to be a record either way. It just so happens that there's a lot of recorded videos of Freddie Fender playing, and he seems to often be playing the guitar when he's singing as well. But yeah, it's just a thought that I had as I was listening to this song.
Yeah, it's pretty common for most country singers. I feel like you usually see them at a piano or a guitar for the most part. But yeah, the song was fine. No qualms with it really.
No, it's funny. I actually think the more we go through these, we're kind of blazing through them. But part of that is that the middle of this record is really what's very packed, and we'll start getting there. But the sequencing is a little strange. I think that like if I were to only listen to side A of this record, I'm not sure that I would be convinced it's all that great. Not saying it's bad at all. I'm just saying that the real weight of it seems to start to fall towards the end of side A, and then the first couple tracks of side B.
Yeah, I actually had that um, thought when I first started listening to this. When you said we should record about this album, I was a little okay. Let's see where this goes because I wasn't sold. The more I've listened to it, I've appreciated them more. for sure, but on first listen, I definitely wasn't wanting to keep listening over and over until I heard the rest of the album. So it is an interesting beginning of the album, I would say.
Yeah, I feel that it's a departure from some of the things we've listened to, and I think that's cool that we're exploring something that's a little bit of a different direction. Um, but I as a whole album, it's a little weaker than some of the others we've covered. And that's okay, because the interesting thing is it had so many hits that spawned off of it. And I don't think it's Freddie's best, despite having some of his most famous songs. But some of the I don't even, did we even talk about the Texas tornadoes yet?
No.
Well, we maybe we can talk about it now. May as well. I mean, some of the stuff with them is a lot more interesting than this, and I'm not saying that they're better than his recorded music under just his name, but it was sort of a super group of a kind, right? Like I think Flaco Jimenez was in it, and you mentioned Doug, and it had it just had a lot of pretty stellar cast of characters, right?
Yeah, and Augie Myers. Yeah, it was a super group for master guys playing together.
Yeah, so and they cover a lot of the songs, like some of the best songs from this actually show up there too. So yeah, I mean that it's just I think you and I were very intentional that we're not doing like music criticism here either. We're just finding albums that we really want to talk about, and that maybe some classics, but a lot of them are albums that maybe haven't been talked about as much from start to finish. And so I think it's fun to dive in even against maybe sometimes our first instinct on these. And all of the records that we've found so far, there's songs that wouldn't necessarily have stopped to listen to if we weren't doing it this way, and then I find myself going back to them, and I think there'll be at least a few on this record that fall into that as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Which brings us to track 4. You Can't Go Here From There, written by Glenn Barber. And I liked the organ opening of this one. Again, I thought it sounded kind of dated for 1974. It just doesn't really sound like it was recorded then, especially with the organ. I thought some of the lyrics, though, you want your home and family, but you want your nighttime flares. Actually, this is the first song that I've gone back to a lot. I think the lyrics of the song are really brilliant country lyrics, and Freddie's voice is just perfect on the track. The organ, that's an interesting choice instead of pedal still or something else, but it works. It's not the worst choice. It's a really great country song here, though.
Yeah, I wrote the part, you're wanting to come home again, but you can't get here from there. It's a sad song. And Freddie's voice really soars on those sort of like tearjerker ballads. And yeah, I like Freddie's voice with the organ quite a bit, and that's not something you get a lot on this album. And in general, of things that I saw with Freddie, it's just not as common. So I think that's a bit of an outlier in the sense. And yeah, it's a like fairly straightforward song, but one that I enjoyed listening to.
Yeah, I love it. His voice is really shines on this song for sure. It is a really sad song, someone that's trying to settle down with someone and the other person's kind of drawn in two directions, just leading them on and not living a lifestyle that is conducive of what they say they want or whatever. I think it's lyrically really nice. It's the more I listen to it, I actually want to listen to it some more. I really like this track.
Yeah, I think he does the sad sort of sound just exceptionally well, to be honest.
Oh yeah, I agree. It's you know the whole theme of this album. You can tell on his face on the album cover. But that brings us to track 5, which is not a tearjerker. It is "I Love My Rancho Grande," and this one was written by Freddie. I assume this is about a large ranch, but that's all I've got. I know, Wes, you speak Spanish, so what is this one about?
Yeah, my Spanish these days is nowhere near as good as it once was, and it's even harder with a lot of songs. Although Freddie doesn't sing super fast on a lot of these, so it's somewhat easier to parse. But I went down the rabbit hole on this too. I So it turns out the song is actually an adaptation of a pretty famous Mexican song called "Allá en el Rancho Grande," and apparently Elvis had a version of this song. Did you know that?
I did not, but I'm not surprised, honestly.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's I mean you're much more learned in the ways of Elvis than I am, but I found a version of it that we can post. And anyway, I read up on it, and I kind of read through like the translations of lyrics too. And as far as I can tell, it's really just talking about it's a very like wink wink and nod nod sort of song about a man or like a cowboy of sorts who's returning to a big farm or ranch. And uh there's a farmhand, a woman who's tending the farm, and she talks about like making him a pair of pants, which I think is really interesting in the style of like other farmers. And it's almost maybe a love song, but it kind of feels like I don't know. It's played for laughs a little bit from what I can tell, and it seems to be in every version I could find. It's like up tempo, and it literally has like people saying I" on it. Like every version of I could find does that. The background vocals kind of fit in, and from what I read about it, it almost started off as almost sort of like a theater song, and then started to become more and more famous, and it's been covered by a lot of people again. Even Elvis apparently did a version of it, so it's kind of cool. Anyway, that's a long story about what it's singing about, but the story itself it's not really anything like earth shattering. It seems to again just be about a man going back to a ranch that he works at, and there's maybe a woman that he's involved with there.
That makes sense. It could have been a theater song. I can kind of hear that if it was spiced up a little bit in a different way. But this is we finally get the Tejano sound a lot on this song, obviously, and it's a standout, more upbeat. I think when the pedal steel comes in with the accordion, man, that sound of those two playing off of each other with just the upbeat drumming on this and his singing it is pretty magical. It's really fun to listen to.
Yeah, it is. I'm so glad it's on this record, honestly, because we'll start to hit the high notes of this record, starting with this. But it's my first reaction to hearing it obviously was like, oh, this is okay. Like this is such a different direction than everything else we've heard so far. But I think that for it to be a Freddie album, it had to have something like this, him being himself and covering what seems to be a standard, like a Mexican standard. Is it just works really well. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of the accordion, but I'm fascinated by the accordion. My wife is Bosnian, and they where she's from, Bosnia originally, and they love some accordion over there in a lot of their songs. And so I feel like I've thought a lot more about it. I learned recently her dad growing up learned how to play it a little bit, but yeah, so I've had the accordion on the mind, and it's an instrument that I think often maybe can be seen as silly in the context of like when you're listening to a lot of American music, we just don't it doesn't show up that often. And I think it's sometimes maligned, but it works really well on a song like this, and it seems to be an instrument of joy in a lot of ways. And I think this song is, from what I can tell, sort of a song of joy. And so yeah, it just works really well here. And yeah, how often are you going to get an accordion paired up with a pedal steel? I don't know of many songs where that's true.
Oh, it's an amazing blend on there. And yeah, I mean, people think the accordion's silly. Just listen to too much Weird Al. It's on Tejano music and some of the country stuff. And I've heard on other stuff too. It's always amazing, in my opinion. I love accordion. And if, it's going to be sad too. It's pretty beautiful instrument, I would say.
It's very emotional, yeah.
You're talking about high points, and I think we're there. Track 6, Wasted Days and Wasted Nights, which was written by Wayne Duncan, Freddy Fender, and Huey. This is, I mean, I would say this is the definitive Freddy Fender song. Would you say?
Yeah, probably so. I mean, it's not the one that I knew first, and it's not the one that sort of dropped back into the realm of the public awareness, but it's probably the best uh, example of sort of what Freddie can do best.
It's my favorite song of his. I think it's his best for sure. I mean, it's one of the best country songs in my opinion. His voice on this is just immaculate. It's one of a kind. There's no one that could sing this song like he did.
Yeah, I agree. I've caught myself walking around the house, sort of singing the intro in a very like bad, not as beautiful version of what Freddie does, but it just gets stuck in your head, and I can't stop like singing it. It's a very catchy song, actually.
Yeah, I don't remember the first time I heard this. So I feel like this is one country song I've just known forever. I mean, because I think it was such a huge song, and like we said, he recorded this back in '59, and this is a re-recording. This song was massive hit for him. It reached number one on the Hot Country Singles charts and number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100.
Yeah. Um, I this also I you mentioned this too, but it starts off with him thanking Doug Somm, and you mentioned that Doug had done the same, I guess, for one of in the Sir Douglas Quintet. They thanked Freddie Fender. Is that right?
Yeah, they actually recorded a version of this a few years before, and he did the same thing, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, the version of the Texas Tornadoes doing this is really good. As I was listening to the album, it was recommended through once the album finished, and I kind of dug in and watched some live videos, and they really get into it. To be honest, they jam a little bit more than you would expect, but a lot of their stuff, at least from what I found, recorded was a little bit later too. It wasn't being done in 1974, so that could have something to do with it. But you said that the re-record was in the early 1990s. Is that right?
Yeah, they. It seems like he re-recorded again in the '80s, and then with the Texas Tornadoes in the '90s, the early '90s. But I actually did find some information specifically on this song. It was engineered by Mickey Moody at Ben Jack's recording studio in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And I did find, for whatever reason, the session players on this track are Bruce Ewan, which we talked about on piano, Bill Ham on guitar, David Hungate on bass, and Bob Ketchum on drums. So from what I found, that's apparently exactly who plays on this specific track, which was interesting. As we were talking about how hard it is to even find on album, it's kind of cool that we have the specifics on this specific song.
I guess just because it was such a hit. Yeah.
Yeah, huge one.
Yeah, it's a really good song. It's hard to believe just talking about the re-recordings like 1959 and then 1971, 1974, the 80s, the early 1990s. I think that speaks to how strong the song was, that it could keep being recorded in each era and have something a little bit different to give. Um, Now you mentioned it was on a soundtrack too.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about how big of and great of a song it was. It's because it was also in the great Beverly Hillbillies movie starring Jim Varney in the '90s. That masterpiece.
It's amazing. Yeah, the what version was on that movie? Was it the original?
I have no idea. I found the anecdote and thought it was funny since we both are big Jim Varney fans here, and definitely maybe not a masterpiece movie, but it was kind of a funny note.
Yeah, I like that. um, yeah, I mean, again, I think it's well worth to dive into the videos of the Texas Tornadoes doing that, and um, yeah, I would agree. I'd have a hard time pulling a better and more representative track for Freddie's kind of take on a song like this, and it just sounds very uniquely him. I don't know of anybody else that recorded this in a way that was as impactful, and a lot of that has to do with the way he sings it too. I mean, his style is just very unique.
Oh, I agree. It's his accent you can hear on this, but with his soul. The song's a soulful song. It's country, but it's not like a crazy country standard or anything. But you can tell with that rockabilly, this all the different influences, it just meshes so well in the song, and you can see why it was like a massive crossover hit. All right, so that takes us to track 7, which is "I Almost Called Your Name," which is the start of side B, and this was written by Margaret Lewis and Myra Smith. Something seems familiar here, Wes.
Boy, yeah. Let's see. this is the third version of this song we've heard, I think, right?
It is, yes.
Yes. And we talked about this when we were covering Linda Martell's record, "Color Me Country," but I think this song we thought maybe it was a standard because it was covered by three people that we were familiar with, kind of all around the same time period. But no, it just turns out it just floated across these three artists, and maybe a few others covered it, but I think these three most famously. The other being Jeannie C. Riley.
Yeah, and like you said, that's just a great song. You can find a particular version you like the best. Like I said, Linda's is mine, but I mean, it is just a great song, don't you think?
I do. And you and I, when we were covering Linda Martell's record, I remember you saying you like Linda's version the best. And at the time, I said, "Oh, I think I like Freddie's the best." And I get back to it here, and I'm like, I think maybe because of what it's sandwiched between, I feel a little bit differently. But what stands out to me on this is Freddie's Spanish singing. I feel that way about it. He starts to do this almost every song for the rest of the album, where he will either do a refrain at the end or sort of maybe in the middle, maybe do the chorus in Spanish. And his Spanish singing is even more than when he's speaking in English. It's very emotional, and you can feel sort of the heartbreak, and that's perfect for this song. And I think Freddie is sort of unabashedly himself, and even though he changed his name, as he said, to appeal to the gringos, he really stays true to his roots on a lot of these songs. And that's what I like best about this version of the song as Freddie sings it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think him even saying that's poking fun and being himself, and it kind of is an attitude that you like. You can tell even, this is kind of the start of the outlaw times, and based on his life, he could have easily gone down that path, but he definitely made music that seems pretty true to himself, and I think you can see that in his character and the way he sings these songs, which is fun.
Yeah, I think of him as a bit of an outlaw guy. And he doesn't fit into that music, but you're right. Like the way where he came from, and almost the way that he approaches some of his songs, they fall into that the personality of sort of outlaw country.
For sure, and that's like the nice dichotomy of country. It's this actual guy that could be seen as hard around the edges, but he has these sweet, sentimental songs and sad songs and joyous songs, and that's why I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, he was not long out of prison, and I don't really think he even kind of says, much to his point, people around him told him it was a little unfair how long he had been sentenced at the time. And I mean, I don't personally think that anyone should be going to jail for smoking weed, but he this was a different time and era, and he did, and he had gotten out of jail and was sort of maybe changing his life a bit. But I think maybe some of the heartfeltness of singing these songs could come from that place that maybe he had given up on his career for a little bit, and suddenly he took off. So he was really in more ways than one, like singing his heart out on a lot of these.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he had obviously, just from the little bit we've talked about, he had a pretty rough go of it up until this time. Just, yeah, I mean, he's a minority, and smoking weed back then was a recipe for disaster with strict laws and silly, just dumb. But I'm glad he came out on top of it, because that gives us the next track, which is track 8, Before the Next Teardrop Falls. And this one was written by Vivian Keith and Ben Peters. And we definitely have talked about this one as well. It was recorded more than a dozen times and a hit for a lot of people, but Freddie took it to number one. And, his bilingual approach here is brilliant, just like on a lot of these, leaning into his roots and himself. You can just hear the sadness in his voice on this song.
Yeah, I adore this version. I It was a hit. It was a hit for a reason. Um, this song is just other people could try to sing it. No one's going to do it as well as Freddie. The Spanish part that he sings is haunting. That is the first time I would use the phrase on this album. Is that it just haunts you. It really you feel sunk into the sadness of the person singing the song. And Um, it just soars. I'm fascinated by his version of this, and even the intro is actually not. It's just almost like you would hear it and just think, oh, it's just going to be like a simple ballad because it kind of pops in with that dun 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 dun. But it just soars from there, and he's really the reason his singing. And we've talked about that so much. I feel like sometimes people don't think about the voice as an instrument on a track, but with so many of these, without the voice that the people are singing have, they would just be okay songs. And we have someone like Freddie singing this song that turns a well-written song and an okay instrumental song into something just otherwise fascinating, because of how he sings it.
Oh, 100%. His voice is this entire song. I mean, you have the accordion in there that sounds nice and fits it, but his decision to sing it in Spanish in the second part and just the emotion that he can pull through and his just the way his voice sounds is just yeah, I mean, he made this song his own for sure, even though a lot of people had sung it. When I think of this song, I only know Freddie, really, even though I've heard other versions, I wouldn't even think of someone else singing this song. He owned it so much.
No, although oddly, I mentioned that I thought Freddie had sort of popped back into the popular consciousness, and I think he did. Maybe, at least for me, it was something that stood out and seemed to have stood out to others. But I think you've watched The Bear, and me too. And I want to say it was either the first or second season. I can't remember, but the character Tina, played by Lisa Colon Zayas, sings the song, and she does it on karaoke. And that episode is one that she actually won an Emmy for. And you can feel the emotion when she sings it too. And I'm glad that that song popped up in that and made me think about Freddie Fender. And I don't know, I don't think Freddie Fender's a household name. I think music fans know him pretty well, but yeah, he's not somebody who necessarily gets talked about all the time.
Definitely not as much now. He would have been back then because, I actually found a crazy fact. I don't know if this ever happened again, but in 75, there were 6 different country songs that topped the Hot Country Singles and the Billboard Hot 100, which, country hasn't always had that crossover success back then. And just for fun, the others one were Hey, Won't You Play Another Somebody Done Somebody Wrong song by BJ Thomas, Rhinestone Cowboy by Glenn Campbell, Thank God I'm a Country Boy by John Denver, and he also had I'm Sorry Calypso on there, and then Convoy by C.W. McCall.
No, I doubt. I mean, I think about what was popular music in that era, and country music was sort of blending into pop music in a lot of ways. And I don't think they, well, I was going to say, I don't think they ever overlapped quite like that. We're sort of living in a time where a lot of country hits are are like pop country and pop crossovers, but that is a completely different situation now. I would argue that these songs were country music songs that happened to play well on pop charts, whereas now most of these country songs that are charting on the pop records are not actually country songs.
Yeah, I mean, like I've said before, I can't go down that route. But yeah, I mean, there's some interesting songs, especially for 75. I'll say that list is missing a little bit of the feminine touch there. I'm kind of surprised on some of those songs, to be honest, but it was an interesting fact.
Yeah, it's cool. I would not have thought about that actually. I'm glad you put that in here.
All right, but that takes us to track 9, which is The Wild Side of Life. And this was written by Arlie Carter and William Warren. I've always had mixed feelings about this song in particular. Hank Thompson did it, obviously, and you had the Kitty Wells made her rebuttal to it. It wasn't God that made Honky Tonk Angels. And it's kind of similar thematically to You Can't Go Here From There on this album. And I like that Freddie decided to mix the two songs, and he did some Spanish in it as well. It was a nice little change on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually did not know about the when I first, was listening to this album and I messaged you. I only today was reading more on it, and I didn't realize that Kitty Wells' song was the rebuttal. I mean, I now know that's like a famous story, and I know the Kitty Wells version quite well, but I agree that this one is. It seems like Freddie's playing on. It's almost a bit of a meta take, like he's playing on both of those things, and um, yeah, I mean the Kitty Wells one is the version of that. The answer to that, the rebuttal is a fantastic song, but I like Freddie's version of this. I would agree it's not my favorite song, but I think Freddie sells it pretty well here, and the backup singers sound good. And yeah, again, I mean, Freddie's Spanish singing is fantastic and sells it in a lot of ways. And some of the guitars are leaning a little bit more on like a Spanish sort of sound and influence here than they have, maybe more so than on any of the other songs. And so it works. I'm not sure it was necessarily like a necessary song on this album. Part of that is just we've just had like hit after hit after hit, and then we get to this, which is just like a good song, but not a great song.
I mean, in theory, it's a great song. I do like his version here. I think his ability to add the Spanish on some of the songs also just adds a different dynamic to something we've heard before. So I do appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, a classic country song, and I don't have much else to say about that.
Yeah, yeah, me either, really.
Which takes us to another classic country song, which is track 10, After the Fire Is Gone. And this was written by L.E. White. And another song that I just love, the actual song. It's another sad one, as this entire album really is, mostly. Yeah, and it fits the theme. It makes sense this one's on here. I like the guitar and the instrumentation on this version, and the background singers and pedal steel in the chorus are also really hit with me. I thought, and with the honky tonk piano solo we get on here, this one definitely more like classic fair country honky tonk. And it stays true to the original song with that fade out, but again, he puts that spin. It fades out and comes back in strong, and now he's singing in Spanish and puts his own spin there. And I thought that was really cool.
That was my favorite part. That it was a almost like a refrain, all done in Spanish, and I think it was. I appreciate that Freddie did that here, and that's what adds something that makes it have some merit to be included here. I guess the most popular version of this was Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn singing a duet. Um, and it's hard to beat those two singing a song together. And this one obviously works pretty well as a duet, but I think Freddie's Spanish refrain at the end almost, again, like I said, gives it a little bit more merit for why it appeared here and what it does that's different. It is a really powerful song. And there's nothing cold as ashes after the fire is gone. Um, I almost hear a little like Porter Wagner in this version. It made me surprised that maybe he never did a version of that. I would have liked to have heard him do this song because it's there's almost like a sinisterness to this. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, I've always loved this song. It's the lyrics are pretty biting for sure.
I think maybe Freddie's version just feels very earnest and it works in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the instrumentation really works. It's one of the more true honky tonk songs on this album.
Yeah, you're right. I could see this one being played really in any honky tonk and people sort of, having fun and drinking beers and hooting and hollering.
Obviously, you wrote some of these songs, but I would be curious to know how the other ones got chosen for the album, since there are some pretty classic country songs on it.
Yeah, I meant to mention this as we were talking about before the next teardrop falls, but he actually addresses a little bit on the back of this where he says that after he had met Huey, it was in one of the sessions that I first cut my country and pop hit before the next teardrop falls on Huey's Crazy Cajun label. ABC's Dot Records purchased the record and signed me when it started happening on country stations in Houston. So Maybe it was just that they had a couple of these hits and they just decided let's record a couple of standards or other things that have been hits and see if they might cross over. I mean, that seems to be fairly common in a lot of these records that we're listening to.
Yeah, it seems to be pretty fitting for the time.
Yeah, we can only guess though. I didn't really see much written about it. I mean, there's, something like 12, 13 paragraphs on the back of this album cover. So written by Freddie Fender himself. So I guess that's about as definitive of a story as you could really ask for about a debut record, but it doesn't really touch on, how they picked the tracks. Which leads me to think probably that, for the most part, Freddie didn't necessarily pick them all.
Yeah, and that's cool we have that because we finally have some liner notes and written by the actual artist is awesome to have.
Yeah, I prefer that over. I don't know. That's just always cool when that's on records and it's a snapshot in time for how they felt, when that was coming out. And um, I mean, at least in the case of this one, I don't think it was a reissue. This looks to be somewhat original. I mean, it has 1974 with a star on it, funny enough, and then it says 1975 ABC Records. I don't know if that's it. There's no indication of why 1974 is starred on that. I don't know if that's because they bought the rights to it, but it's kind of interesting that it's listed that way on the back.
All right, so that takes us to track 11. Then You Can Tell Me Goodbye. And this was written by John D. Loudermilk. He wrote one of my favorite songs ever, Break My Mind, which I don't know if have you ever heard that song?
I don't know off the top of my head, probably, but I'd have to refamiliarize. It's not one I couldn't tell you right away that I know it.
Yeah, that's an awesome one. There's George Hamilton did it, but there's several different versions. Porter Wagner actually, and Graham Parsons did one. It's a awesome song. But he also wrote Abilene, which I'm sure you've heard, Indian Reservation, Talkback, Trembling Lips, Tobacco Road, Waterloo. So many classics. I was pretty amazed to see all the different tracks he wrote.
Has he come up on another album that we covered?
I don't think so, but I'm not for certain, but I don't think he had. But I would say this is one of my favorites of his, and kind of like a standard song in per se. It was originally recorded by Don Cherry as a country song back in 1962, and then there was a doo-wop hit by the Casinos in 67. Eddie Arnold had a number one hit with it in 68, but my personal favorite is Betty Swan's version. It's a unbelievable soul version, which it was in a TV show as well not too long ago. I saw there's even a recent version by Frankie Valli.
Oh, um, I hope he found time to blink.
I listened to it, wasn't bad.
I like Frankie.
This song, I just love this song. So as I said, Betty Swan has a beautiful soul version of this, which made me also really love Freddie's version because he's super soulful on this song, and I would put it up there with Betty's. Not quite as good for me, but I really loved it. And I mean, his voice was very soulful, and he could really sing this song well, and I like it being the ending song on this.
Yeah, I almost wish you could have made this the opener.
Yeah,
How many times have we said that? I feel like we've had some strong ending songs and some weak openers on a couple of these that we've covered, and it's funny in how the sequencing came to be on this one. And yeah, you mentioned the casinos version. I actually think I'm not again. I always like to clarify. I'm not saying this in a bad way, but this is a maybe the most dated sounding song on the record. It sounds like it was, originally from around 1962 in its own ways, but it feels a lot like he's doing a version that's mimicking the Casinos sort of doo-wop version of that, which is fine. It works really well here, but I don't know that I it's played super country here necessarily. Um, I wrote that I love the guitar, but it sort of gives me some like Enchantment Under the Sea dance vibes, the scene in Back to the Future. Like I could see like people in their like late 50s dance like swaying around to this song. I don't know. Did you feel that way?
Oh, it definitely sounds straight out of the '60s, but I just love the song. So I guess yeah. In terms of when this album came out, it's an interesting choice, but this is a song I can listen to over and over, any version of it, really. I think it's a beautiful song. Very sad song, extremely sad. It's kind of hard to listen to, but I just love the sound of it.
Yeah, it's a sad record overall. There's really only maybe the one song. Yeah, I'm looking at the track listing again, and I mean, really, I love my Rancho Grande is maybe the few one of the few like songs that's played with joy or happiness, and I guess it makes sense when you think about where his life led to up to this point. I mean, it's he was playing what he knew and playing some heartbroken songs and singing them from that perspective. And perhaps, you never quite know how much your personal life is bleeding into the art that you're creating, but it feels to me like you can't just sing from the heart the way that Freddie's doing on a lot of these without having some sort of experience like that.
Totally, and I mean, what good is a country record without a bunch of tear jerkers? I probably looked like Freddie when I was listening to this.
Same, yeah, it's a good one to if you don't think about sort of sadness and like relationships and things when you're listening to these songs and this album, then I think you're missing some of the point of it. And yeah, it's played well. It's the more and more I listen to it, the more I realized how different it is from every other record we've covered so far. Um, and that's funny because we keep talking about how some of these songs are dated or like some of them in terms of when he recorded them actually were much older than when this came out. But it feels like this music is moving in the direction of a lot of the kind of country music that you and I talk about pretty often, and we talked about with the outlaw movement. And I don't know, I'm fascinated by that. I It makes me excited to talk a little bit more about some like Texas musicians, which yeah, it's just such a different sound, such a different approach to songwriting, and with Freddie's case, just being from Mexico originally, and implementing a lot of the sounds of where he was from, and even Cajun country. Like I can't think of many other people that blend things in that way. And yeah, it's fun. It was fun to dive into Freddie's life as much as it was fun to dive into this record.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you chose this one because I wasn't super familiar besides the hits. And then, now I want to go dive into more of Freddie's music, and I'm sure I'll end up down a Tejano rabbit hole learning more about it because I've heard different stuff, but I'm not well versed in it. But, I love listening to it. So it's going to lead me down some other country rabbit holes that I'm sure I'll enjoy.
Same. I think that's part of the joy of this and why we even do this thing is that we care about this music and the people who made it and how it got made. And every time we dive in, I feel like I come away with something more I want to learn about and listen to. And I don't know, that's part of how I experience music as a whole. And I think this album in particular, it being his debut and it being someone that neither one of us knew super well. I mean, I'm sort of the same. I know I picked the record, but I just happened to have it and had listened to it from front to back and like really enjoy what I've heard of Freddie Fender. But I'm by no means an expert on his music or super learned, so it was really fun to dive into it.
I agree. Did you have anything else about the album you wanted to say?
No, not really. I guess I'm glad that the accordion made its appearance on this record. That's all I'll say as a final note.
Yeah, and after talking about all these sad songs, I'm gonna go listen to "I Love My Rancho Grande" to get my mood back up. And that is Who's Gonna Fill Their Shoes signing off. Thanks for listening. Adios.
Yeah. Adios.